Sir, can you bury my sister? The little alien boy asked. But what the human did next? The blizzard on Icium had raged for 23 days straight, trapping Michael Anderson in the alien settlement of Frosthold. He stared through the viewport of his temporary shelter, watching ice particles dance in winds strong enough to strip the paint off a shuttle. His combat suit hung on a rack nearby, a hulking mass of gray steel plates and thermal inserts that had kept him alive during his emergency landing. Fucking wonderful, he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. The settlement's inhabitants, blue-skinned humanoids called Navidians, had given him shelter but kept their distance. Fine by him, Michael wasn't here to make friends. He checked his emergency beacon again. Still transmitting, still no response. The Terran Alliance would find him eventually, but with the storm interfering with communications, it could be weeks, maybe months. A knock at his door broke his brooding. Unusual. The Navidians typically left notes or sent messages through the settlement's rudimentary communication system. Michael opened the door to find empty space, then looked down. A small Navidian child stood shivering in the doorway, no more than 5 years old. His bright blue skin was several shades paler than normal, and his snow-white hair was matted with ice. Tears had frozen on his cheeks, and a thin scarf fluttered around his neck. But what froze Michael's blood wasn't the boy's appearance, and it was what he carried. Bundled in gray fabric was the tiny form of an infant, motionless and blue-white. "Sir," the boy said in halting standard, his voice trembling from cold and grief, "can you bury my sister?" Michael's throat tightened. He'd seen death before, caused plenty of it himself in the border wars. But this... "Where are your parents?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Mother went to Star's last moon cycle," the boy whispered. "Father never came back from ice fishing. Just me and Lena now. But Lena's cold. Won't wake up." Michael knelt down, his massive frame dwarfing the child. With gentleness that surprised even himself, he took the bundle from the boy's arms. The infant was stiff, her skin like ice. The brutal Icium winter had claimed another victim. "What's your name, kid?" Michael asked. "Taro," the boy replied. "I'm Michael." He glanced at the howling storm, then back at the child standing alone in the doorway. Something shifted in his chest, an unfamiliar ache. "Come inside, Taro. It's too cold out there." The boy hesitated and stepped in. Michael closed the door behind him. "I'll help you bury your sister," Michael said, placing the bundle carefully on a table. "But not until the storm breaks. We can't dig through the permafrost right now." Taro nodded, his large violet eyes fixed on his sister's body. "Are you hungry?" Michael asked. Another nod. Michael rummaged through his rations, finding a protein bar that was compatible with Navidian biology. He handed it to the boy, who devoured it in seconds. "When did you last eat?" 2 days, Taro mumbled. "Shit," Michael whispered. "Where have you been staying?" "Our home." But the heater broke, got too cold. Michael looked at the child, really looked at him. Beneath the dirt and frost, his clothes were tattered. His thin frame spoke of neglect that predated his parents' deaths. "You can stay here," Michael said, the words coming before he'd fully thought them through. "Until the storm passes, then we'll find someone to look after you." Taro's eyes widened. "Really?" "Yeah," Michael replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Really?" That night, Michael fashioned a small bed for Taro from spare thermal blankets. The boy fell asleep almost instantly, exhaustion claiming him. Michael sat watching him breathe, the rise and fall of his small chest, a reminder of how fragile life was on this frozen rock. He looked at the bundle containing Taro's sister, which he'd wrapped in a preservation sheet from his medkit. In the morning, he'd find a proper container for her, something dignified. Michael had never considered himself a compassionate man. The border wars had burned most of that out of him. But watching the small alien child sleep, knowing he was completely alone in the world, stirred something Michael thought long dead. Just until the storm passes, he told himself firmly, then he's someone else's problem. But even as he said it, he knew something had changed. The walls he'd built around himself had cracked, just a little, letting in the cold, and something else, something warm. Michael woke to the sound of something crashing outside. The emergency lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging his quarters into darkness. Shit, he muttered, immediately alert. The temperature in the room had already dropped noticeably. A small whimper came from the makeshift bed where Taro slept. The boy sat up, violet eyes wide with fear, reflecting what little light came through the viewport. "It's okay, kid," Michael said, his voice steady. "Power outage. Happens in storms like this." He moved quickly, pulling on thermal layers and grabbing his emergency kit. The combat suit would be overkill indoors, but he strapped on the thermal gauntlets and boots. His military-grade flashlight cast harsh shadows as he checked the room's temperature monitor. -15 and dropping. "We need to get somewhere warmer," Michael said. "The settlement must have emergency shelters." Taro shook his head. "The big building has backup power, but Elder Knox doesn't like strangers." "Well, Elder Knox is about to get a crash course in human diplomacy," Michael replied, wrapping Taro in thermal blankets. "Can you walk, or should I carry you?" "I can walk," Taro said, though his thin legs trembled as he stood. Michael nodded, impressed by the kid's resilience. He carefully placed Taro's sister's body in a preservation container he'd fashioned from his medkit components, then secured it in his pack. "We'll keep her safe," he promised Taro, who watched with solemn eyes. The corridor outside was pitch black and already freezing. Michael's breath clouded in front of him as he held Taro's small hand, guiding them through the darkness. Other residents were emerging from their quarters, their blue skin almost luminescent in the gloom. "The central hub is this way," a female voice called out in accented standard. Michael turned to see a Navidian woman gesturing down the corridor. Her white hair was pulled back in intricate braids, and unlike most Navidians, she looked directly at him without averting her eyes. "Thanks," Michael replied, surprised by her directness. "I'm Lacey," she said, falling into step beside them. "You're the human everyone's been whispering about." Her eyes fell to Taro. "And who's this little one?" "I'm Taro," the boy answered before Michael could speak. "He's helping me bury my sister." Lacey's expression softened. She knelt down to Taro's level. "I'm sorry about your sister, little one. And your parents." "Gone to the stars," Taro whispered. Lacey looked up at Michael, something like respect flickering in her eyes. "You're helping him?" "Just until the storm passes," Michael said automatically, though the words felt hollow now. They reached the central hub, a domed structure at the settlement's center. Inside, hundreds of Navidians huddled together for warmth. Emergency lights cast an eerie blue glow over everything. At the center, an older Navidian male was barking orders. "That's Elder Knox," Lacey whispered. "He's traditional. Doesn't trust outsiders." "Fantastic," Michael muttered. As they entered, conversations hushed. Eyes turned toward them, toward Michael specifically. The elder stopped mid-sentence, his gaze hardening as it landed on the human. "The off-worlder should return to his quarters," Elder Knox announced loudly. "This shelter is for our people." Michael felt Taro's hand tighten in his. The boy was shivering despite the blankets. "With all due respect," Michael replied, his voice carrying across the room, "your people include this child, who will freeze to death in unheated quarters." The elder's eyes narrowed. "The child can stay." "You dash. "The auxiliary power couplings are failing," a Navidian technician interrupted, rushing into the hub. "We have maybe an hour before this building loses heat, too." Murmurs of fear rippled through the crowd. Michael assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. A settlement this size would have backup generators, probably buried to protect them from the elements. "Your main generators, where are they?" Michael asked the technician. "Northern quadrant, but the access tunnels are probably blocked with ice by now," the technician replied. Elder Knox scowled. "This is not the off-worlder's concern. It is if we all freeze to death," Lacey countered, stepping forward. "He's wearing a Terran combat suit. Those things can withstand temperatures that would kill us in minutes." All eyes turned to Michael. He sighed internally. So much for keeping a low profile. "I can help," he said simply, "but I'll need a guide who knows the access routes." "I'll go," Lacey volunteered immediately. Elder Knox began to protest, but the technician cut him off. "We don't have time to argue. The human's right. We'll all die without power." Michael knelt beside Taro. "I need to go fix something." will you be okay here for a little while? Taro nodded solemnly. Will you come back? The question hit Michael harder than expected. Yeah, kid, I'll come back. As he stood, Lacey was already gathering equipment. Their eyes met, and she gave him a small smile that seemed to say, ready when you are. For the first time since landing on this frozen rock, Michael felt something besides irritation and impatience, a sense of purpose, and maybe something else he wasn't ready to name. The generators roared back to life under Michael's hands, sending vibrations through the frozen maintenance chamber. Beside him, Lacey let out a whoop of triumph, her breath clouding in the still frigid air. I can't believe you fixed it that quickly, she said, admiration clear in her voice. Our technicians have been struggling with these systems for cycles. Michael shrugged, wiping grease from his hands. Just needed to bypass the frozen relays and reroute through the secondary circuits. Basic stuff they teach in Terran military training. Basic for humans, perhaps, Lacey replied, her violet eyes studying him with new interest. You're full of surprises, Michael Anderson. The way she said his name, rolling the syllables in her accented voice, sent an unexpected warmth through him that had nothing to do with the gradually rising temperature. We should head back, he said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the confined space. Taro will be worried. The boy has attached himself to you quickly, Lacey observed, as they made their way through the now illuminated access tunnels. It's unusual for Nevidian children to trust so readily, especially outsiders. He's been through hell, Michael replied. Sometimes trauma makes strange connections. Lacey nodded thoughtfully. And what about you? You don't strike me as someone who typically takes in orphaned alien children. Michael was saved from answering by the chime of his emergency beacon. He pulled it from his pocket, staring at the blinking light with mixed emotions. Your people? Lacey asked, her voice carefully neutral. Yeah, Michael confirmed. Terran Alliance patrol ship. They've picked up my signal and he paused in reading the scrolling text. They'll be here in 3 days once the storm front passes. The news should have filled him with relief. 3 days and he'd be off this frozen rock, back to civilization, back to his life. Instead, he felt an unexpected heaviness. That's good news, Lacey said, though her tone suggested otherwise. They reached the central hub to find a transformed atmosphere. Lights glowed warmly, heating systems hummed, and the previously fearful crowd now buzzed with relieved conversation. As they entered, heads turned. To Michael's surprise, several Nevidians approached to offer thanks. Elder Knox stood at the center, his expression sour but resigned. The off-worlder has restored our power, he announced grudgingly. We extend our gratitude. Michael nodded, scanning the room for Taro. He spotted the boy sitting with an older Nevidian woman who was feeding him something steaming from a bowl. The boy has been fed and cared for, Elder Knox said, following Michael's gaze. Now that the crisis is resolved, we can discuss his placement with a suitable family. Placement? Michael repeated, a sudden protectiveness surging through him. He is orphaned. Our customs dictate. I'm taking care of him, Michael interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. Elder Knox's brow ridges rose. You? An off-worlder who will depart as soon as the storms allow? The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He glanced down at his still blinking beacon, then back at Taro, who had spotted him and was now rushing across the room. Michael! You came back, the boy cried, throwing his small arms around Michael's legs. I promised I would, didn't I? Michael replied, ruffling the boy's white hair. Later that evening, with the settlement's power fully restored, Michael returned to his quarters with Taro. The boy fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the day's events. Michael sat in the darkness, staring at his beacon, turning it over and over in his hands. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Lacey standing there, holding a container of something that smelled spicy and warm. Thought you might be hungry, she said. It's traditional to offer food to those who've helped the community. Is that the only tradition bringing you here? Michael asked, surprising himself with his directness. Lacey's blue skin darkened slightly around her cheeks. A blush, he realized. Among my people, saving lives creates a bond, she said, stepping inside as he moved aside. And you saved many today. They ate together, talking in low voices to avoid waking Taro. Lacey told him about life on Icium, about the beauty beneath its harsh exterior. Michael found himself sharing stories of his own travels, missions he'd completed, worlds he'd seen. 3 days, Lacey said eventually, glancing at his beacon. Not much time. No, Michael agreed. Their eyes met across the small table, and something electric passed between them. In Navidian culture, she said softly, we believe life is too precious and brief to waste time denying connection when it appears.